alle. Willkommen. Heute Abend machen wir eine Veranstaltung mit McGovern und Elisabeth aus den USA. Beide ehemalige, hochrangige CIA-Agenten. Die Themen wir machen breite Themen, Ukraine, Mittleren Nahen Osten und Drohnenkrieg aus Deutschland. Ich wollte einfach am Anfang sagen, dass diese Tour von Ray und Elisabeth ist von der deutsche ist meine Organisation, DFGVK, Deutsche Friedensgesellschaft und Vereinigte Kriegsdienstgegnerinnen. Okay, das ist unsere Organisation und insbesondere aus Baden-Württemberg und auch von Whistleblowers Netzwerk in Hamburg, und dann gibt es verschiedene andere Unterstützer. IALANA hat zum Beispiel Presseerklärungen rumgeschickt und Tim Slater kommt vom Munich American Peace Committee, macht jetzt Dolmetschen, und ich bin Elsa Rassbach, auch eine US-Bürgerin. Ich wohne sehr oft in Berlin oder sehr viel in Berlin und arbeite mit der US-Friedensorganisation Coop, Women for Peace. Wir sind Teil einer größeren Koalition, das heißt United National Anti-War Coalition. Da sind auch zum Beispiel die Veteranen für den Frieden und verschiedene andere International Aktion Center und verschiedene andere wichtige Organisationen. Genau wie hier in Deutschland kämpfen wir natürlich, unsere Friedensbewegung in den USA zu stärken und teilweise zu erneuern. Ich wollte auch dann sagen, dass es gibt verschiedene Infos auf dem Tisch. Das dürft ihr mitnehmen. Die sind zum meisten Empfehlungen oder Schriften von Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Das ist die Organisation von Elisabeth und Ray McGovern, und die werden länger darüber erzählen. Jetzt habe ich vergessen, Ray zu fragen. Die sind beide jeweils 27 Jahre bei der CIA. Elisabeth von 1983 bis 2010 und Ray von
1800. Von John Kennedy bis zum die ältere Bush.
Okay, gut. Und er wird mehr erzählen. Er hat auch immer beigetragen über 7 US-Präsidenten, darunter einige der schlimmsten, aber vielleicht nicht so schlimm wie heute, also morgendliche Briefungen gemacht und so. Ich wollte zu der Literatur sagen, auf dem Tisch, und wahrscheinlich, genau wie wir nicht genügend Plätze haben, haben wir nicht genug Literatur. Ich wollte ankündigen, dass am 24. September in der Wilmer, das ist das ökonomische Zentrum in der Wilmersdorfstraße 163, ich brauche meine Brille nicht dafür. Und da werde ich und Andreas Schuler von der European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights zu Ramstein referieren. Und zwar European Center also ist ECCHR gekürzt. Und sie sind die Anwälten, die NGO, die Anwälten von den jemenitischen Opfern von einem US-Drohnenanschlag, die die Bundesregierung angeklagt haben. Dieser Prozess geht jetzt in Berufung, also sie werden jetzt Einsprüche erheben, und wir können darüber mehr sagen auf der Veranstaltung. Und das ist um 19 Uhr am 24. September. Und dann, ganz wichtig, am 25. September und 26. September gibt es eine der ersten, also wirklich Demos bei Ramstein, das wir lange Zeit hatten. Am 25. am Abend gibt es so eine Konferenz, eine Info, und am 26. ist die Demo. Und diese Zeitung, was auch hinlegt, erzählt darüber. Aber wenn es nicht genug Zeitungen gibt, dann muss man unter Ramstein-Kampagne.eu gucken im Internet und da bekommt man das. Und zu allerletzt, ich wollte von unserer Drohnenkampagne, diese Flyer, die deutsche Drohnenkampagne, da bin ich auch Mitbegründerin, wie auch André Hunko, der da sitzt vom Bundestag und vielen anderen Gruppen und Individuen. Wir haben uns im März 2013 gegründet, mit Fokus auf zu verhindern, dass Deutschland bewaffnete Drohnen, Kampfdrohnen zum Überwachen und zum Töten anschafft. Und wir haben auch eine Unterschriftensammlung, das ist immer noch aktuell. Diese Drohnen sind noch nicht angeschafft worden, aber es ist ein harter Kampf, das zu verhindern. Wahrscheinlich kommt die Entscheidung in den kommenden Monaten. Es gibt auch eine Unterschriftensammlung, bestimmt haben viele von euch das schon unterschrieben, aber ich werde das jetzt hier rumgeben. Und darin haben wir im März 2015 nach den Enthüllungen zu Ramstein, eine kleine Einleger zu Ramstein ist drin, die auch sehr gute Info zu Ramstein, was heißt das, diese US-Drohnenkampagne von Ramstein aus. Und was bedeutet es für die Menschen dort und was bedeutet es für Deutschland, weil Deutschland eigentlich die Macht in der Hand hätte, die Regierung letztendlich die US-Drohnenkriege erheblich zu verhindern oder sogar zu stoppen. Wir in den USA kämpfen, wir haben nicht dieselben Mittel, weil das US-Gesetzgebung und die US-Gesetzgebung, Entschuldigung, mein Deutsch manchmal, unter Krieg gegen den Terror gibt den US-Präsidenten das unbeschränkte Recht, zeitlich und räumlich, mindestens bis jetzt, auch auf US-Boden übrigens, alle zu verfolgen mit Drohnenanschlägen oder mit Verschleppungen, was auch immer, den er mit Hilfe der Geheimdienste und so als Terroristen bezeichnen möchte. Also das ist das Ende von meinem kleinen Intro und jetzt gebe ich Break.
Also, vielen Dank, dass Sie gekommen sind. Der Raum ist überfüllt und das hat mich sehr gefreut. Ich kann Deutsch, aber mein Englisch ist ein bisschen besser. Und wir haben einen simultaneous translator, Tim. So if those of you who need a simultaneous translator, that capability is available. Now, this is the kind of crowd that we seldom get in the United States, partly because of our media, which avoid advertising things like this and keep us pretty much shunned from what we call the mainstream media. And let me just make this point right in the beginning, that having been in Washington 52 years now, I've seen a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes in importance, and that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media, and that is big. That could not be bigger. Thomas Jefferson, he was asked, if you had a choice between a government and a free press, what would you choose? He said, no problem, free press. Because without a free press, you're going to get a dictator, okay? So that's really big, and it plays into everything that we're going to be saying tonight, because unless you are well accustomed to finding the truth, it's very, very difficult indeed to find it, and it's even more difficult to discuss things with your neighbors who only read the Washington Post or the FAZ. It used to be, when I was stationed here, I could read the FAZ and I'd find out what's going on. Right now, it's very different. I read the one over the weekend, and they're Flüchtlinge, 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 and nobody asks, warum ist die Flüchtlinge? Wir werden, our topic is, wie werden heute Kriege gemacht? Und a subtitle would be, wie werden heute Flüchtlinge gemacht? We were at the Bahnhof just yesterday, and Elisabeth, who speaks fluent Arabic as well as German and Spanish and I don't know what else, she was talking. She was having a little chat with some of the Flüchtlinge there in Arabic. It was very moving. There were people trying to help, and our respect goes out to Frau Merkel and others who realize that we need to extend, well, what was the slogan there? Alle Menschen haben die gleiche Rechte, you know? But to think about why these Flüchtlinge are here, that is dangerous because it might talk about how the United States attacked Iraq and destroyed that country. It might talk about what's happened in Syria, how that country has been destroyed. 4 million Flüchtlinge from Iraq. 2 million had to leave their homes and stayed in Iraq, 2 million in the surrounding countries. Syria, again, 4 million. I mean, these boggle the mind. So please keep that in mind as we go through our little thing here about wie werden heute Kriege gemacht. The answer is pretty simple. Gegen. And we're going to be able to tell a little bit about the Yuga that we experienced and why it is. People ask us, you know, they say, Elisabeth, when did you decide to be an activist? When did you have a conversion? And they ask me the same thing. When did you fall off your horse on the way to Damascus, Ray? And I say, I didn't change. We were in a very honorable profession, intelligence analysis. We were set up, we were given career protection for telling the president the truth. Now, that was what we were used to. What changed? We got corrupt presidents and we got corrupt directors of Central Intelligence. That's what changed. And as soon as we were able to retire, we did so, and now we feel it our Pflicht, you know, our duty to spread the truth around here because it's so hard to get it in the mainstream media.
I have to give a little announcement. I'm very sorry.
So let me just give a little background here. The first time I encountered the corruption, or one could say the prostitution of intelligence, was during Vietnam. Now, I knew that my colleagues held that there were 500,000 Vietnamese communists under arms in South Vietnam. But General Westmoreland, he wouldn't accept any more than 299,000 Viet communists under arms. And so I asked my friend Sam Adams, who was responsible for this area, I said, Sam, doesn't make any sense. You know, generals need to exaggerate the threat from the enemy. Why is Westmoreland diminishing the threat from the enemy? And he said, Ray, he said, you know, with the kill count, we're killing so many hundreds each week, each day sometimes, and the press in Saigon is not really bright, but they can do arithmetic, you know. And so if we tell them now that it's more than 299,000, well, there was a cable. Now, General Abrams, who was an excellent tank commander under Patton in this country and Italy, he was really bright, but he wasn't, he was a really good tank commander, not so bright in terms of politics. He wrote a cable, and I will quote from it. He wrote a cable on the 20th of August, 1967, and it said, we can't possibly accept the higher numbers of the enemy, quote, because we have been projecting an image of success in this war, and there's no way that we could avoid the press from drawing an erroneous and gloomy conclusion, period, end quote. There it was, in black and white. There were twice as many enemy in South Vietnam, and the political generals were deliberately disguising that and saying there were only half as many as there were. Why? Because then they couldn't project an image of success in this war. Now we're going to get around to ISIS, okay? And the same thing is happening today. But let me just do it sort of like in a little bit of order. We had Vietnam. I gave you an example of how intelligence was really controlled by the Army and not the CIA, and how the president probably ordered that these things be kept from Congress. So let's go ahead to Iraq. Now, when Elisabeth and I, and Elisabeth was still on active duty, when we saw our profession of intelligence analysis being corrupted for the express purpose of deceiving our elected representatives out of their constitutional prerogative to declare or otherwise authorize war, well, it doesn't get any worse than that. This is what Nuremberg warned about, the Nuremberg Tribunal after World War II. They talked about a war of aggression, and they defined it. And they said a war of aggression, is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only in so much as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Okay, accumulated evil of the whole. What could that mean? Could they mean like kidnapping people off the streets of Italy? Could they mean like moving them to black prisons hidden from sight? Or maybe torturing them? There's a lot of accumulated evil going on, folks, and we decided that we needed to blow the whistle on that, and we formed a little group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we started preparing memoranda for the president, as we used to do on active duty, so to speak. Memorandum for the president, subject, Iraq with Colin Powell's speech, that was our first memo, and from VIPS. So lots of things happened before Iraq, and I was watching from afar, but the web being what it is, I could figure it out, my friends could figure out what was going on. There was great pressure on intelligence analysis to come up with the correct answers. And Elisabeth, my colleague here, had direct experience in this, and I've suggested that she might want to share the kind of pressure that she experienced as a branch chief, a very responsible job in one part of the agency. Would you be able to do that? Okay.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, so in the period before the United States attacked Iraq, which was March 2003, sort of before and during the war, I was the branch chief in charge of media analysis for Iraq in the Central Intelligence Agency's open source center that monitored all the media. So we were monitoring the speeches of Saddam Hussein and analyzing the Iraqi press. And in the weeks just prior to the war, my office received a call from the office of Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. And the request that I received from this office was that we should look in Iraqi media for the connection between Al-Qaeda and the government of Saddam Hussein. So when I received this request, we had to go out to our bureau in Amman, Jordan, where we monitored Iraqi media, and to all our other sort of contacts, media contacts in the Middle East, and we searched everywhere in Iraqi media for evidence of a link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, and we found absolutely none. So I went back to Deputy Defense Secretary Wolfowitz and said, no, we don't have any evidence of that. And I thought that would be the end of things. But about 2 weeks later, our office received exactly the same request. Again, please find us the link between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. So again, we exerted every effort. We pulled out all the stops, so to speak. And again, the response came back, sorry, we can't find anything. There's no evidence of this connection. So oddly enough, we kept getting this request until it became very evident to me that our office was not providing Wolfowitz with the correct answer. So this is just a small example of the kind of pressure that we were starting to come under. And I finally advised my superiors that I was going to go back to Mr. Wolfowitz's office and ask them, what is the original source of this allegation? Maybe it would help us in our search if you could tell us where you got this idea in the first place. And of course, the office of Paul Wolfowitz never got back to me on that. And that's just a small example of the kind of subtle political pressure that analysts within the CIA and in the intelligence community at large were starting to experience in the run-up to the war.
So we get an idea of a personal experience of being leaned on really, really hard. Now, to their credit, Elisabeth's folks refused to change the conclusion. But our former colleagues on the strategic side were asked to say that there were weapons of mass destruction there. And they caved in. First time in my experience of that 27 plus years where responsible managers and analysts said, in effect, Mr. Tenet, he was the head of the CIA, the president wants us to cook up intelligence to start a war. We can do that. Just tell us how soon and what to say. And the answer came back loud and clear. We're talking early September 2002. The answer was, no problem. You have to do it in 2 weeks, and the conclusions have to come out to be exactly what Vice President Cheney said on the 26th of August 2002, where he talked about Saddam Hussein on the verge of a nuclear weapon, having all manner of chemical and biological weapons and so forth. Now, if the director had told us in our day that we had to do a piece of intelligence, in quotes, like this, we would have said, George, you're kidding, right? I mean, right, yeah, you're kidding, George. And if he said, no, we have to do this, and we have to do it this way, we would have been out of there. We would have left that room. There might be a couple of sycophants that hung around, but he would have known that he had an insurrection on his hands because we didn't do that kind of stuff. It's a long story how the CIA managers of intelligence became corrupted. Suffice it to say, it started with Bill Casey under Ronald Reagan and was fostered by a fellow named Bobby Gates, who used to work for me actually in the 70s. And I think he became, what did he become? He became a head of the CIA, and didn't he become the Minister of Defense as well? Yeah. If you smell the prevailing winds and tune your sails accordingly, you can get up pretty high. Anyhow, that was corrupted. And when we say in the United States, it's a saying, there are 4 words, and I'm going to say the first 2. And you're going to probably guess at the second 2. You ready? Okay. After 9/11, okay, I'll give you another hint. After 9/11, everything changed, right? Everything changed after 9/11. So, whereas before we used to do honest intelligence, no longer was that necessary because now the president had a pretext, a 4 months, to make war in Iraq. How was he going to do that? He was going to corrupt the intelligence to draw a line between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And when the war started, 69% of Americans believed that Saddam Hussein was partly responsible for 9/11. Okay? That's as bad as it gets. Now, this wasn't the fault of Elisabeth and our honest folks. It was the fault of the press mostly and the leaks that the government made. And I want to make a point here. It was not only foreign policy that was affected by Bush and Cheney's rather crass attempt to play on the basest instincts of Americans after 9/11. Revenge. Okay? could have been quite different. We could have looked on, well, why is it that these people hate us so much? And you know, the answer, they hate our freedom, or they hate our democracy. Yeah, that doesn't wash. They hate what we do. They hate our policies. They hate our support of dictators in that part of the world, and they hate our total identification with the state of Israel. Now, on the other side of this is the domestic situation where they saw an opportunity to clamp down on our civil rights. And we have this Bill of Rights in the Constitution, 10 amendments, and they're really golden. The first one is why I can speak here freely to you, and the second, well, the fourth one is supposed to protect our internet and our telephone conversations. That's been violated. And the fifth one is, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Oh, wow. Well, does that mean you're not supposed to kill American citizens like Awlaki? Well, it used to mean that. But now the Attorney General, the head of the law part of our government, tells us, well, no, it says due process. It doesn't say judicial process. And so we do the due process right here in the White House. Thank you very much. We don't need the courts. Hello? That's as bad as it gets. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of clips here. They're only about a minute each, and I hope that no one falls asleep because this is on the exam, okay? And these are very brief, and they have to do with what's happened with NSA and our inner freedoms. Now, I hope this will work. We'll see what it does. Okay, Michael Hayden was the head of NSA, and when Dick Cheney went to Michael Hayden, NSA being the National Security Agency, and said, Mike, after 9/11 everything's changed, and so we're gonna monitor all American conversations and other conversation and also emails. Would you do that? Now, General Hayden, like me and like Elizabeth, took a solemn oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But this Air Force general, to his great disrepute, saluted smartly and said, sure, I can do that. And later he's justified that by saying, well, he could do whatever he wanted because of 9/11. Now, after it became clear that General Hayden was doing all this stuff, and we can thank James Risen, one of the best journalists ever in our country, writing a book about it, okay? Now, one interesting aspect of that is that he got this story early in 2004. Now, in 2004, there was an election, which was running for re-election. And James Risen went to his editors there in the New York Times and said, hey, I got an incredible story. They're monitoring all the telephone calls in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Let's go. Now, the New York Times used to be an independent newspaper. Now they ask the president if they can publish something like that. Okay. And the answer came back, no, Well, suffice it to say that the New York Times was as important a factor in Bush's re-election as any other factor. They suppressed it. They suppressed it until James Risen went to his betters in December of 2005, okay, a whole year later, and he said, look, I got this book coming out. It's going to be a little embarrassing. You're paying me big bucks to write for the New York Times, and you won't run this story, but it's in the book, and the book's in galleys, it's being produced. So the head of the New York Times went down to the White House at the president's request. He said, we're sort of between a rock and a hard place here. It's kind of very difficult. We're going to have to publish the story. And Bush said, no, you can't do that. He said, well, we're going to do it anyway. And so the story came out. Now, that's all sort of a prelude to showing who they pointed as the point man to explain what NSA was doing. And the point man was a fellow named General Michael Hayden. And I hope this works. It's only a minute long, or a minute and 25 seconds, so please listen carefully.
Cause, I believe. The amendment says unreasonable search and seizure, but does it not say profitability? The more standard.
Okay.
My understanding is that the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution specifies that you must have probable cause to be able to do a search that does not violate an American's right against unlawful searches and seizures.
Actually, the Fourth Amendment actually protects all of us against unreasonable search and seizure.
But
that's what it says.
the measure is probable cause, I
The
believe.
amendment says unreasonable search and seizure.
But does it not say probable?
No.
The court standard, the legal standard,
Unreasonable search and
the
seizure.
legal standard is probable cause.
Just to be very clear, okay? And believe me, if there's any amendment to the Constitution that employees of the national security agency are familiar with, it's the Fourth. And it is a reasonable standard in the Fourth Amendment.
To quote the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States in its entirety, the one the General and the NSA folks are so familiar with and know is about reasonableness and not about probable cause, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Well, maybe they have a different constitution over there.
We show you that to show you how the leadership of our community has been lying through its teeth on internal matters as well as external matters. And there's one gentleman named James Clapper, I use the word gentleman loosely, who was in charge of interpreting satellite photography before Iraq, and couldn't find any WMD because when his people said, well, this immigre says there's a production of chemical weapons at this coordinate here, when we looked, we couldn't find it. It was actually a chicken coop, you know. So what Clapper did was keep out of the intelligence the reality that despite all these billions of dollars that have been spent on very sophisticated collection techniques, satellites, not one site for weapons of mass destruction was found. So that was Clapper. Hans Blix, who was head of the International Atomic Energy Agency at the time, commented, "Oh no, it is very, very, very interesting that they had 100% certainty that there were weapons of mass destruction and 0% certainty about where they might be." That's how bad it was. That's Hans Blix, the head of the UN International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm going to show you one more clip that's about the same length, and this one has to do with this fellow Clapper. Now, Clapper was asked to explain about NSA, and not all the revelations of my friend Edward Snowden had been out in the open yet, and so one of the more tenacious senators we have in our Senate, Ron Wyden, had him before, under oath, had him before Congress to testify about what NSA was doing. And this, again, is only about a minute and a half, so if you fall asleep, remember, it's on the exam. That's a line I use when I'm at university.
Just one, Madam Chair, and I thank you, and this for you, Director Clapper, again on the surveillance front, and I hope we can do this in just a yes or no answer, because I know Senator Feinstein wants to move on. Last summer, the NSA director was at a conference, and he was asked a question about the NSA surveillance of Americans. He replied, and I quote here, "The story that we have millions or hundreds of millions of dossiers on people is completely false." The reason I'm asking the question is, having served on the committee now for a dozen years, I don't really know what a dossier is in this context. So what I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where it inadvertently, perhaps, collects, but not wittingly.
Thank you. I'll have additional questions to give you in writing on that point, but I thank you for the answer.
Thank you very much.
Not wittingly. Well, we know the truth on that, don't we? And we have Edward Snowden to thank for that. Edward Snowden and Clapper and I have to tell you that having been with Edward Snowden twice now in the last 2 years, I can tell you he's the real deal. I mean, there's nothing fake about that man. He is what he is, and he did what he did from very patriotic reasons because he took the same oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and he was just aghast at what was happening to our Fourth Amendment. That Fourth Amendment, you know, the British were responsible for that Fourth Amendment. They used to come into the colonists' homes and take their daughters and take their merchandise and so forth. And so our forefathers, our founders, were hell-bent and determined that that would not happen anymore. And so here we have what happened. Now, Clapper, of course, was fired as soon as he lied under oath, correct? No. No? He wasn't? Where is he now? What's Clapper doing now? Anybody know? He's the new head of all U.S. intelligence. The CIA, the NSA, intelligence of the State Department, the Defense. He is the director of national intelligence. What is the point I'm trying to make here? Your B&D and your government is being fed by a bunch of crooks and liars, okay? You can't trust what they say. Look at their record. Why Obama keeps them on is another story, but he does. Now, how are we doing on time here?
Since we're talking about time, I wanted to, I did want to mention that there's an interview with Ray and Elisabeth at 9:30, so we're going to have to end the whole event at that point, but I think you can still continue.
Good, yeah. So let me just take it a little forward here. What you saw there was an example of something highly unusual. The so-called oversight committees in our Congress, Elisabeth and I call them now the overlook committees. You know? There's no oversight of what's going on. The notion of oversight is ein makaberes Witz, you know? It's a macabre joke, okay? They do what they want. And I understand it's not very different in this country. I don't know to what extent you do. But, you know, there's secrets and they're mobile secrets and all that kind of stuff. So that was a very unusual example of Senate oversight. Now, Wyden said, don't you think something should happen to Clapper because he lied under oath? Everybody gone. Well, he's a really nice fellow. We'll leave him in office. And here's a very important lesson there. The President of the United States is not a free man when it comes to the intelligence services. He's afraid of them. He was even heard to comment at one fundraising meeting when progressives were criticizing him. Obama, Mr. President, you're supposed to be a progressive. How can you act the way you're doing? And after they did that about 100 times, he got up and he said, look, don't you remember what happened to Dr. King? He could have said, don't you remember what happened to JFK? Now, you know, it's understandable that he's concerned, but I don't think a person like that should run for President of the United States if he was going to be so afraid of the intelligence services. I want to fast forward here and talk about some good news. After Iraq, after the debacle having to do with intelligence on Iraq and the destruction of Iraq itself, the people in Washington thought, well, Bush and Cheney, they have their sights set now on Iran. And maybe we need to do a national intelligence estimate on how close Iran is to a nuclear weapon. And somebody said, yeah, we can't go through what we did on Iraq. Let's get somebody honest in to do an estimate, to manage an estimate. And they had to go to the State Department. But they found an honest man, very experienced, very clever. His name was Tom Finger. He's a recipient of our Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence. He had been the head of the State Department intelligence outfit. He came over, brought some of his expert, honest analysts, and all during that 2007, they labored on a bottom-up assessment from all the evidence of where Iran was in terms of building a nuclear weapon. Now, they did this in secret, and they had some luck mid-year when they got some new intelligence, but in November of 2007, they issued a national intelligence estimate unanimously. That means all 16 intelligence agencies of our government. There were only 12 when I was on active duty. All 16, quote, with high confidence judged, now listen to this, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. Now, that judgment was reaffirmed, revalidated every year between 2007, when this estimate came out, and till today. How did Bush and Cheney react to that? Well, we know. Bush wrote a memoir. One distasteful duty of an analyst, intelligence analyst, is to read these memoirs. I don't suggest you buy them. You can get it in the library. What he said was this: that intelligence estimate, when I had just said that Iran was just on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon, that was an eye popper. That deprived me of the military option. For, this is a quote, how can I justify using our military to attack the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community said has no nuclear weapons program? Bummer. I mean, if they were really concerned about Iran making a nuclear weapon, they found out this unanimous decision that they hadn't been since 2000, what would have been the normal reaction? Wow, are you sure? Did you check that out? But call the Israelis. Great news, the Iranians now working on a nuclear weapon. So, what I'm saying here is that an honest job was done, and it prevented the war that Cheney and Bush fully intended to start, not finish, before they left office in 2008. That was a big deal, and it made me proud of the honest analysts and Tom Finger, the guy from the State Department, for doing that. Besides that, they enabled what has come to pass now, the very famous deal with Iran, where people kind of realized that, it was a little bit, what's the word, surrealistic, Those of us who know this story, we say, well, what did we achieve with this deal? Oh, we really put it over on the Iranians. What we did, we say, you must stop. You must stop that nuclear weapons program that we know you stopped 12 years ago. But if that's what it takes, that's all to the good. We can verify this, and of course, that's where the CIA comes in as well. Trust but verify, that's what we can assure everyone who's interested, except the most hardliners, that we can make sure that Iran abides by this and continues not to build a nuclear weapon, okay? So that was the good news, and we were kind of happy with that. And also, I'll mention two other things, and that is Syria. You remember Syria in August of 2013 with those chemical weapon attacks? on the 21st of August outside Damascus. Do you remember that? The big, now, Obama had said, you know, that would be a red line. You know, if you use nuclear weapons, Bashar al-Assad, that's a red line. And so, guess what happened? There were some attacks there. Now, what did our colleagues say? Well, let's look at the sarin that was used, the nerve gas. It's not from Syrian government stocks. It's homemade stuff. So, Mr. President, you're being mousetrapped. Okay? Those people who want you to intervene in this Syrian conflict openly are trying to mousetrap you by going back to what you said, red line, red line, red line, and then accusing Bashar al-Assad, as John Kerry did 35 times before a press conference at the State Department on the 30th of August, 2013. 35 times, one way or another, he said, Bashar al-Assad, governor, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, okay? They all did it, right? Well, what happened? Well, we played a role. Our former colleagues said, look, Mr. President, it ain't so, you know. John Kerry may be really good about driving boats up the Mekong, but he doesn't know much about chemical warfare, and he certainly doesn't know much about our strategic interests. General Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also went to the President. And I remember that Saturday morning, right after Kerry sounded the death knell to Bashar al-Assad and said, we're in position and we have to retaliate. The President got up in the Rose Garden and said, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has told me that our warships are in position to attack Bashar al-Assad's government, but that there is no time sensitivity to this, and we can do that next week or the following week or next month. And so I'm going to Congress to ask for appropriate authorization. Wow. That was new. Who helped on that? Our colleagues, General Dempsey, and also the British, who for the first time in 3,050 years voted against the war. I exaggerate, but only a little bit, okay? You know, the British usually vote for war when people like Tony Blair say we got to do it. I'm a little prejudiced, I have to admit, because I'm Irish, okay? And my grandfather, my Irish grandfather, took me aside one time. He said, no, Raymond, do you know why the sun never sets on the British Empire? I said, yeah, I know. He said, you don't know. No, sit down and I'll tell you. He says, the sun never sets on the British Empire because the good Lord would never trust the British in the dark. Now, who has the black boxes from the Malaysian aircraft? Anybody know? The British. Why do the British have the boxes for the Malaysian aircraft? You know, that really stinks. And while I'm on the subject, our colleagues were able to prevent John Kerry from getting up and saying, I have an intelligence assessment that said the pro-Russians knocked down that plane. And so we didn't get an intelligence assessment. We got something called a government assessment. A new genre, new animal, okay? What does that mean? That means it was prepared at the White House, not in the intelligence community. So on those two issues, the Syrian gas thing and MH17, I'm proud of our fellow analysts for stepping up and saying, Mr. President, it ain't the way John Kerry said it was. And when John Kerry bragged in September of 2013 that the moderate rebels were gaining strength in Syria, and they were able to, they were just on the verge of really making a terrific advance, no one believed that. No one in Washington believed that. And besides, he accused the Syrians again of doing the poison gas. So what happened? Well, the next day, Obama arrived in Petersburg for a summit. And that same day, Mr. Putin felt that he had to comment on John Kerry. And he said, on врет, он знает, что врет. Это печально, which means he's lying. He knows he's lying. This is really sad. So as Obama arrives in Petersburg, Putin, now I've never heard a Soviet president or general secretary call our Secretary of State a liar before, but clearly Putin thought he had the goods on anything, and he knew, I believe, that Obama knew also that Kerry tended to, like we say, exaggerate. Now, today we're having the ISIS thing, right? Okay, and everybody's trying to figure out, well, what about ISIS? What should we do? Should we drone them to death, or what should we do? And we have the kind of situation now where the intelligence community, the honest ones, are preparing papers that are being changed around. Maybe would you like to chat about that, Elizabeth, and talk about General, what's his name, Landry and all that kind of thing? Yeah, good. Elizabeth is, as you can see, much younger than I and much more recent on duty.
So one of actually the last position I had before I retired was as Deputy National Intelligence Officer for the Near East in the National Intelligence Council. And just a few months before I retired, I sat in on a meeting of the National Intelligence Officer for Military Affairs. And this was a meeting to discuss the situation in Iraq following the drawdown of US forces. This was in early 2010. And the National Intelligence Officer for Military Affairs was actually a general. And he was asking the analysts to report on the situation on the ground in Iraq. And all the analysts that were present at the meeting were reporting a great spike in violence around Iraq, that things were not calming down at all as had been anticipated after the drawdown of American forces. But in fact, fighting was multiplying, people were dying at an alarming rate. And when they were reporting about this, the response of the National Intelligence Officer was not to take notes and nod his head and say, okay, this is something I'm going to include in the National Intelligence estimate on this subject. Instead, he said, well, no, that's not what I've been hearing from my sources. I think you must have the wrong information. And as he went down the line, each analyst was reporting the same thing, giving very concrete evidence as to how violence in Iraq was increasing. And it was very clear to me, just as an observer at this meeting, that this National Intelligence Officer for Military Affairs had a preordained agenda, and that he was not going to take into account this information about the real unfortunate situation on the ground in Iraq. Now, what this means is that probably the president was going to get faulty information, maybe information that suited the military, that things were going according to plan in Iraq. And what does that mean in terms of the information that the Bay and Day might get from the US? What are the implications about the information that our allied countries get? So that's something to think about. If intelligence is politicized in the United States, when that migrates abroad, how will your country's policy be then formulated? Are you really getting the information that you need?
You know, and right now, as I mentioned, the analysts there, the military analysts are having a heck of a time with their superiors. There are a lot of honest intelligence analysts also in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they are reporting what they're seeing with ISIS. And they send these reports to their generals, and when they see them published, they've been changed. The analysts are saying, this is a fool's errand. We're not going to ever succeed in this unless we change our tactics. The analysts are saying that the drone warfare is doing two things. It's increasing the recruitment lines behind Al-Qaeda and ISIS recruiting stations, and it's endangering, it's creating more war for all of us. And the generals are saying, oh, we're beginning to win now, we've stopped ISIS, and so this is really, really important, because this has hit the press now. 50, intelligence analysts have complained to the Department of Defense Inspector General saying, we write this stuff, we do our best to do an honest job, and then the generals falsify our conclusions. Do you remember what I said about Vietnam? Well, it's happening again. And the good news, of course, is there are these analysts that are speaking out, and somebody must have leaked it to the press. The bad news is that the mainstream media is so corrupt that they take dictation, they take notes from what the White House Sprechsaal says, and they publish that in the New York Times the next day. And so Americans are completely bereft of information. I had a very educated, a very astute gentleman ask me the other day, why did the Russians shoot down that plane over Ukraine? Now, I have to say, 90% of Americans believe the Russians did it. Why? Because that's what they're told by the mainstream media. So we're trying to break through that. The good news is we have a fifth estate now, which is up in the ether somewhere, but I know I can get reliable information out of it. And when we talk about the big decisions that have to be made now, and here in Germany, well, if the war on ISIS is not only going well for us, in other words, if we're not stopping ISIS, but rather counterproductively bombing this and that, or droning this or that, what does that mean? That means that the generals are going to have their 30 years war. I couldn't believe that our generals are talking about a 30 years war. They have no sense of history, that's clear. And they're saying, I thought maybe the Westphalian Treaty to put an end to the kinds of 30 years war we're going to have. So, what will happen? Well, this thing will just escalate. And as soon as a lot of people in the Near East learn that we couldn't do the drones without Ramstein, Ramstein is the sine qua non. It's what we need. We can't go somewhere else for a lot of physical reasons and for technical reasons. We couldn't do it on the North Pole or in London or any other place because of the curvature of the Earth. And the reason we can, look, they have these so-called pilots look down from their screens and say, oh, that guy looks like, that looks like a terrorist right there. 2 seconds, he's dead, okay? Or his Hyundai is dead, or whoever has his Hyundai is dead, okay? This would add a couple of seconds more if they had it. It would be very expensive to move. I don't know who would take them. But so Ramstein, is really central to all this. And Ramstein is, as I've been told here, German Hoheitsgebiet. Okay? And so, when I think about how, I can understand. It's been 70 years since the war, I was really young during the war, but I remember the aftermath of the war. I remember the Germans and Americans were like this, mostly because of the Soviet threat. Well, the Russian threat is manufactured. The Russian threat in Ukraine all comes from the coup that the United States and others in the EU mounted against the duly elected government of Ukraine. Nobody realizes that. Nobody in the States. They all start with Putin. Putin, very bad. Putin had no shirt on sometimes. Putin ride horse with no shirt on. Putin, very bad. Putin invade Ukraine. Well, that's what they're getting. So what am I saying here? I'm saying here that if we can't make common cause and point out to the world at large, and especially the people here in Germany, that the counterproductive Drohnen-Krieg is causing more and more jihadists and lengthening the war against terror, if you want to use that term. If we can't point out how counterproductive it is, then there's no way to stop it. And you people out here have, if it's a democracy here in Germany, the wherewithal to stop it. What you have to do, in my view, well, I'm told not to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, all right? One can say that, you know, in the 50s and 60s, the Germans were pretty much adolescents, right? You know, they kind of needed to do what the armies said for obvious reasons because of the terrible threat from the east, right? But you guys are erwachsen now, you know. Grow up. This is not doing any good for Germany. It's endangering you. And when these jihadists find out what a critical role Ramstein plays, then you're going to have a double terrorist threat right here in Germany. Because it is fact, it is flat fact, that without Ramstein geht's nicht mit dem Drohnenkrieg, okay? And we need to stop that. Yeah. Now, on the table here, there's a thing that many of us signed earlier, well, last month, I guess it was, the month before. And shall I mention the Anträge, the reclama?
Yeah, you can mention the videos and mention how that's where we're at. We need
Okay.
Germany to do
What
something.
we're doing is we have some video spots that appeal to the pilots. Now, again, these are not pilots with the helmets on, you know, doing the joystick. These are people sitting at little computers with their mouse and saying, that guy looks like a terrorist to me. Yeah. And he's dead, okay? So, what we're trying to do is sensitize people. We're trying to make people realize what this is in a human dimension. And you know, one of the best things I learned on this trip was a story that Elisabeth told me. And it was a story having to do with the last year of her, well, not the last year, but as they were planning the invasion of Iraq. And I think it really speaks volumes. Would you share that with the folks?
Sure. In November 2002, obviously just a few months before the United States launched its attack in Iraq, I was invited as an Iraq analyst, which I was in 2002, to participate in war games that were sponsored by the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the purpose of the war games was to play out various post-war scenarios in Iraq. What would Iraq look like after a U.S. invasion? And so we played the roles of various political factions and such. And on the final day of the war games, I was seated next to a gentleman who was originally from Iraq, but he was American, married to an American, and he was present at the war games because he was the husband of an American professor there. And while we were listening to the conclusions of the war game, I could see that this gentleman, while he had dark glasses on, tears were coming down. I could see the tears on his cheeks. And I turned to him and I asked him, what is wrong? Can I help? And his response to me was, here at this conference, at these war games, we're discussing political, military, strategic implications of a possible war on Iraq, but nobody here is talking about the humanitarian consequences. No one here is talking about the hundreds of thousands and even millions of Iraqi people, and he said, my people, that are going to die. And when he stated this to me, I tried to think of something to console this man, and I couldn't think of anything to say to him. I was sort of stunned into silence. And then at that very moment, I just felt extremely ashamed that I was even there at these war games, because he was absolutely right. Nobody there was discussing the humanitarian aspects, as if these wars were sterile and as if nobody was ever killed. And this is the kind of psychopathic mentality that I find is endemic in Washington, where elites are planning these kinds of wars, these kinds of attacks, thinking only of political, economic, military benefits, profits from selling arms, and the humanitarian equation is just completely removed from the picture.
Two more things.
So.
So that is the callousness. That is the ohne Empathie sort of aspect to all this. That is the human dimension. And last time I checked, we're all humans, aren't we? You know? Watching those refugees, watching those Flüchtlinge at the Hauptbahnhof yesterday, I said, wow, you know. So let me draw from some stuff that I've learned about German history. How many have heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Okay. How many have heard about Albrecht Haushofer? Ah, some have. Good. Can I tell you anyway? For those who haven't heard?
Sure.
Yeah. Albrecht Haushofer was a Theologue at the University of Berlin. He had tenure. Some of you know what that means. He was very secure. But as he saw his Jewish people, his Jewish friends being wrapped up, and the gypsies and all, he also had a gewissen, he also had a conscience, right? And he started speaking out, collected quite a good following, and was wrapped up by the SS and put in another Berlin jail. Now, the SS had this procedure, very orderly, of course. They wouldn't shoot you, as in this prison, or hang you, as in with Haushofer is this guy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, okay? Bonhoeffer was hanged. They shoot people in this. So as the Allies came close, they said, well, you must sign a confession. I mean, we can't shoot you until you confess. So Haushofer said, that's crazy, I'm not going to sign any confession. Okay? So they shot him anyway. And as they picked him up off the floor, out of his pocket, a little settle, okay? It was his confession, written in the form of a sonnet. Okay? It's not very long, let me recite it to you. Schuld. Doch bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. Ich musste schärfer Unheil nennen. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lange gedenkt. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. Dr. Martin Luther King said many times, there is such a thing as too late. I'm talking about not only stopping wars, but stopping the internal oppression that we are experiencing in our country, perhaps even yours. If the Drohnen-Krieg was a still more real terrorist incidents here, you can expect that kind of repression to come in big time here as we are experiencing it. So there is such a thing as too late. Think about how Haushofer was thinking as they shot him, and think about that confession that he made. And in that same vein, and again keeping in with this Menschlichkeit approach here, you all saw that wonderful. Well, let me ask Elisabeth to talk about a poem that we commissioned to translate it into German. It has to do with a little boy whose picture you've seen recently in the newspaper.
So I'm sure all of you have seen the picture of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, who was found washed up on the beach. I'd like, if I may, to read a short poem to you. It was actually written by Samah Sabawi, who is a Palestinian-Australian poet and writer who is currently based in Australia. But she grew up in Gaza, and so she is a refugee, a Flüchtling herself. The title of the poem is Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe. Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe. Nicht auf einem Boot von Asylsuchenden, nicht an der Hand einer Mutter, die ein Kopftuch trägt, nicht auf dem Arm eines braunhäutigen Vaters. Von niemandem begleitet, den die Welt verteufeln kann. Das Gesicht im Sand öffnet er uns mit seinen für alle Zeiten geschlossenen Augen, die Augen. Er kommt einem so vertraut vor, wie ein Sohn, ein Enkel, ein Neffe, ein kleines Kind auf dem Spielplatz. Wie das im Laden nebenan, das uns immer mit großen Augen mustert. Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe. Keine Papiere, kein Visum, kein Ausweis. Ein Opfer unserer Politik. Die Kriege, die wir dort angezettelt haben, lassen uns hier nicht mehr los. Die Stimmen, die wir so lange stumm geschaltet haben, sind auf einmal laut und deutlich zu vernehmen. Ein Bild wiegt 1000 Wörter auf. Doch wie viele Wörter bedarf es, damit wir uns nicht mehr fürchten vor dem anderen? Wie viele Wörter sind nötig, damit wir zu unserer Menschlichkeit stehen? In der Ferienanlage hatte man mit so etwas am wenigsten gerechnet. Die Touristen waren schockiert. Sie wollten doch nur den Sonnenuntergang betrachten und auf dem Strand miteinander schlafen. Er hätte auch an einer anderen Küste gespielt werden können. Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe, gedankenloser Flüchtling. Warum musste er gerade in unserem Meer ertrinken? Erinnern wir uns. Die Palästinenser stellten die erste Welle der Entrechteten in der arabischen Welt dar. Inzwischen sind sie nur noch ein Tropfen im grenzenlosen Ozean von Exil und Leid. Wir lernen daraus, wenn man das Unrecht gären lässt, breitet es sich ins Unermessliche aus. Jeder wird zum Flüchtling. Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe. Sie trieben auf den Wellen vor der Küste Haifas, auf der Flucht vor dem Irrtum. Das Gesicht im Sand. Die Nakba ist ansteckend. Wenn sie nicht behandelt und bekämpft wird, breitet sie sich jenseits der Grenzübergänge und des Gazastreifens aus, bis hin nach Syrien, in den Irak, nach Afghanistan, in den Jemen. Ihr Gift verpestet die Gewässer des Mittelmeers. Rotes Hemd, Blue Jeans, kleine Turnschuhe. Er ist schön und unversehrt, das Gesicht im Sand. Die Haie haben ihn nicht gefressen. Sie überließen ihm den größeren Bestien, den Waffenhändlern, Kriegstreibern und Ölscheichs, den Neokonservativen im Westen und den Tyrannen im Osten. Er ist eine Opfergabe für ihr großes Festgelage.
Vielleicht eine ganz kleine Pause und dann können wir mit Fragen anfangen und Kommentierungen. Wie ich sagte vorher, müssen wir pünktlich um 21:30 Uhr Schluss machen. Vielleicht 5 Minuten danach, aber nicht so. Ja, wollt ihr eine Pause? Nein. Okay, ich wollte nur bitten, deswegen, dass ihr euch kurz fasst und am besten Fragen stellt, statt ganz reden und so weiter. Und wenn ich jetzt jemanden übersehe, ich versuche es so gut ich kann, okay? So, ich fange aber mit hinten an. Ja.
Do you have any personal experience was telling on democracy now that the US has to bomb 7 countries within the next 5 years. Do you have any personal experience with that paper?
With General Wesley Clark? Yes. He is a strange duck, as we say in English. He tells a story.
Children, just giving that the audience can get the mic after this. Okay, sorry.
He tells a story about going to Paul Wolfowitz in 1991, right after the war against Iraq in 1991. And he said, well, good job, Paul. He was in office then. And he said, what kind of lessons did you learn from the war in 1991? And Paul Wolfowitz said, oh, a very important lesson. And that is that the Russians won't stop us. The Russians won't stop us. 1991. 1992, Wolfowitz wrote the so-called defense planning guidance, which said our policy needs to be to make sure that no one rivals us in military might, and we only have about a dozen years to do that, and so we've got to do that now. That was his planning guidance. George H.W. Bush thought that was a little extreme, so he changed it a little. But guess what? So we got 1991, 12 plus 12 is what that, 2003, right? And we know what happened in 2003. So this is a really important aspect of this story. The Russians can't stop us. Well now, folks, sie están us. The Russians not only can stop us, but they're going to stop us, and that's a good thing for all of us. What we did in Ukraine was...
We're trying to switch women and men, okay?
So when Lavrov says, as he did yesterday, that yes, we're sending military equipment to Syria, and we're doing it now, and we're going to continue to do that, well, that's a reasonable reaction to what could come in Syria with Bashar al-Assad driven from power. You want ISIS ruling Syria? So all I'm saying is that Clark is, he's a general that pretends to be very educated, but he let this information out when he was running for office back several years ago, and it speaks volumes about the attitude of our top policymakers, Wolfowitz especially, of the same Wolfowitz that Elisabeth was talking about, how wie werden heute Kriege gemacht? Well, hopefully, and I never thought I'd be saying this as an old Russian scholar and analyst, what I missed in those years was the deterrent that Russia posed. If the Soviet Union was in existence in 2003, I have serious doubts as to whether Paul Wolfowitz or anyone else would have taken the risk of invading Iraq. So, the Russians are coming back. They're a major factor now. And in his best moments, Obama knows that and is willing to work with them. Witness the fact that Putin helped Obama on Syria by having all the Syrian chemical weapons destroyed. Now, you don't find that in the press very much, but all Syrian weapons were destroyed. Who figured that out? Putin and Lavrov, okay? And they presented it to the president and said, look, Mr. President, you don't have to do a war. I mean, you can skip this war. We'll get those chemical weapons destroyed. And he did. And they were. They're no longer the kind of weapons that were in the Syrian army inventory.
Elsa, you need the microphone to repeat the question so he can understand it. Take Ray's microphone.
Oh no, he can get this. He can hear that.
A short question. I was moved by the poem. Where would I get it?
If you want to give me your email address after the conference, I'll be happy to send it to you.
Okay. Now you are there. Yes? You're, yeah.
Ich habe mir den Satz notiert, nach dem 9.11. hat sich alles geändert. Und da hätte ich gern von Ihnen gewusst, ob Sie die Hintermänner wissen und ob auch die anderen Geheimdienste mit involviert waren, wie zum Beispiel der EME.
Wer soll das antworten? Wir haben nur ein Mic hier. Also Ray oder soll ich erst versuchen?
Willst du das antworten?
I didn't understand it at all, so I'll give it to Ray.
Die Frage war, er hat auch, was Ray gesagt hat, nach dem 11.09. hat sich alles geändert. Und die Frage ist, was es bedeutet, weil das nochmal erläutern soll, ja? Who's behind September 11? Who's behind it? Who's behind September 11? Wer hat 11.09. organisiert? Das weiß die bestimmt als CIA.
Ich könnte euch erzählen, aber dann musste ich alle töten. Tut mir leid, ja, aber so ist es. So, willst du, was ich erzählen? Now, this is a serious question. And well, people say to me, Ray, don't you believe that Cheney is capable of arranging 9/11? And I say, yeah, I believe that. But I don't do faith-based intelligence. Doesn't matter what I believe, it's the empirical evidence that I have to deal with. That's what we intelligence analysts do. And so, long story short, the 9/11 report was a cover-up. And how do we know that? Well, the authors of the report, Kane and Hamilton, have written a book. And they've said, we were set up to fail. We were not given enough time, not given enough money, not given enough access to secret material. We were set up to fail. Well, isn't that nice that they tell us that 4 years after the so-called investigation? Bottom line here is that the people that are trying to get answers to these questions are dismissed as conspiracy theorists. They're trying an honest thing to find out what went on. I really don't like them being called conspiracy theorists. I admire them for what they're doing. As for me, I just have to say we need an independent investigation. We can't go by what the Kane.
Sie möchten das Gedicht auch.
Ja, jetzt.
Ja, ich möchte dazu sagen, also übersetze bitte den Mikrofon. Ja, ich wollte dazu sagen, genau zu diesem Thema, dass ich überzeugt bin, dass das ein faschistischer Putsch ist. Und zwar diese Mafia aus Geheimdiensten, internationale Finanzkonzerne, Militärs, also was man so als militärische Instanzen komplett, wobei das ja heute schon eigentlich nicht Militär, also man kann ja sagen, es hat mit dem Internet auch zu tun, dass es eine neue Qualität ist und deswegen ist das so unglaublich gefährlich. Und die haben ja schon Papier gemacht vor einiger Zeit, ein Strategiepapier über den neuen Nahen Osten. IS ist ja nichts anderes als sind die Handlanger, die die Zerstörung des Nahen Ostens durchführen. Das ist doch die Wahrheit. Die werden doch von Saudi-Arabien gesponsert. Die haben ja gar, das ist Islam bei CIA.
Ihre Frage?
Ja, meine Frage ist, ich bin überzeugt, dass das ein faschistischer Putsch ist. Ja, aber was Sie dazu meinen?
Vielleicht haben Sie recht.
Oh, it's nice to have that cool air coming in.
I'm just worried that whole, you can hear what we're saying.
I suppose your German is better than my English, so I apologize to speak German. Eine Frage, kurz und kurze Antwort. Haben Sie Hinweise, dass nach dem friedlichen Aufstand in Syrien die Eskalation zur militärischen Dimension mit einem Engagement oder einer Mitbeteiligung von möglicherweise auch ausländischen Geheimagenten, in dem Fall US-amerikanischen Agenten, vonstatten gegangen ist. Ich habe noch von keiner Revolution auf der Welt gehört, die von einem Grenzstaat ausgegangen ist.
In very short words, there was a memorandum prepared for Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996 called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. I suggest you read that because it was written by the same people who were responsible for our invasion of Iraq. The idea there is to create the kind of chaos that exists now, so that if Shia and Sunni are killing each other off, Israel sees itself as more secure. And U.S. policy follows Israel's policy, as they brag, no daylight between the two. And that's a real problem, because it's very myopic to think that Israel will be safer over the medium or longer term.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm working inside a group who is involved against struggles against the German intelligence service, and therefore my question, it is a part of Iraq war, the second one. The first one was between Iraq and Iran, and the second one also with Bush senior, yes. And did you know that German companies delivered production means for producing poison gas to Iraq before the second war? And did you know that agents of the BND, Bundesnachrichtendienst, have been involved into it? And was the goal of this war to destroy the weapon of mass destruction?
Okay.
Yes, I knew that the precursor chemicals were supplied not only by Germany but other West European countries and U.S. companies. They were supplied to Iraq, and that is why Iraq was able to very quickly manufacture these chemicals into chemical warfare. What most people don't know is that even though these chemical weapons were used against Iran to great effect and killed thousands and thousands of Iranians, did the Iranians retaliate? Anybody know? The answer is no. Now, why? Well, there's a fatwa. Now, fatwa, you know what that is, kind of a religious edict from Islam. Now, it's not like an encyclical that we Catholics, we say, oh, that's really nice, and we don't have to guide ourselves accordingly. A fatwa is taken very seriously. Now, you can't convince Americans that Iranians are really loath to develop weapons of mass destruction because of this fatwa. But how else do you explain their failure to retaliate against the Iraqis who are using chemical weapons to great effect? And, I just put that in the back of your head. The Iranians are always criticized for this or that or the other thing when provoked, when greatly provoked during the war against Iraq from, 81 to 89, they did not use chemical weapons, even though they had full capacity to produce them. So I thank you for raising that point, and I want everyone to know that that is on the historical record, and to the degree that it had to do with the fatwa, I don't know, but I tend to think that it certainly coincided and followed the fatwa. You want to add something?
I think Diana.
Let's continue.
Guten Tag. Herr McGovern oder Frau Mary? Hier.
Ah, so.
Hier.
Hallo.
Ich wollte Sie bitten, vielleicht können Sie ein bisschen über eine Lösung dieses ganzen Konflikts sprechen. Ein kurzes Beispiel, der ehemalige Senator Gravel, alaskischer Senator, hat vor 2 Tagen bei der UN eine Pressekonferenz gegeben und hat gesagt, wir brauchen die neue Seidenstraße. So wie Executive Intelligence Review, die Organisation von Lyndon LaRouche, das auf die Tagesordnung gesetzt hat, die neue Seidenstraße, das muss die höhere Ebene werden, um mit Russland wieder friedlich zusammenarbeiten zu können. Und darüber hinaus, meine Frage, wie können wir das in die Öffentlichkeit bringen? Wie können wir diese höhere Ebene in die Öffentlichkeit bringen? Und wir brauchen mindestens wieder ein Renaissance-Denken, wie das von Nikolaus von Cusa, dass die Gegensätze sich nur in der höheren Ebene auflösen, in der Coincidentium oppositorum. Danke, Coincidentia oppositorum. Wie können wir das in die Öffentlichkeit tragen?
Did you understand the whole thing? How do we solve this whole conflict?
Yeah,
And
well,
then he was talking about you, and did you understand him? I should
I think so. How will we solve this thing in the end?
Yeah, I should give you a
Sitting around the table,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah?
Yeah, did I not say that?
Well, go ahead.
I guess, you know, maybe it shows my age, but in the old days, in die alten Ritteszeit, jo, sowas. Ja, ich habe 5 Jahre in Bayern gelebt. Auch Feuerisch. Yeah. So, in the old days, as we say, when we had problems like this, we used to call a conference of all the stakeholders, all the countries around where the problem was. We'd go to Paris, we'd go to Geneva, we'd go to Vienna, and we get people to sit down around a table, and that's exactly, in my view, what should happen now. There are countries really threatened by ISIS. Nobody wants ISIS to succeed, except maybe the Saudis, and some of the other folks there in the Gulf. And so you sit them around a table, and you get serious about this, and you say to the Saudis, look, this is very, very unstable. Stop it. Stop providing money and arms to ISIS. And you hold them to that. And you tell them, well, this is hard. We're not going to sell you any more fancy arms if you do this. Well, that's hard because you know about the military-industrial complex. They will want to sell arms no matter what. But we have to get serious about this before it gets out of hand. And if it were not for the fact that everyone has an interest in containing ISIS, except the ones I mentioned, then it would be hard. But it's not hard. Why am I the only one to suggest we might want to try negotiations here? Not with ISIS, but with everybody who's affected with ISIS, and come up with a common plan. It should be not that difficult. That, for what it's worth, is what I would recommend.
I'm trying to do women and men alternately, so you got it. Poor Diani has to run all the way up, but.
Yeah, I want to support your initiative about Ramstein, which is, it's always a fight if you hear these horror stories to know what you have to do. And then, obviously, if there's something you can do to stop Ramstein. But the other thing is, what do you think about the Marshall Plan for the region, which is right now in this spreading chaos and war? I'm talking about the fact that there has always been saying that we cannot invest here, we cannot do anything because there is a war. And it has been the excuse for 30 years or even more. And it is a wrong excuse because it's the same problem we are having in Germany. We're saying we cannot invest because we have to balance the budget or whatever. It's always an excuse. So I think that the UN National Assembly, which is having its 70 years jubilee at the end of September, is the last chance, the conference that you are talking about, basically, where you can actually start a new system, a new economic system in the region as well.
And I'm talking about investing in water projects and science, engineering, all these things. And I support what the Executive Intelligence Review is saying in that direction.
Okay. Vielen Dank.
Oh, yeah, this
I didn't know there was a question there. I think that is obviously a good idea. It makes me marvel that nobody suggests this or promotes it. But I'm.
Is rich, so they could suggest it.
Yeah, well, I think that you know.
They have some equity.
Yeah, we need to do negotiation. Look at the Iran deal. That was very difficult, mostly because of the Israel lobby in our country. But Obama saw it through because of its obvious merits. So we can't be derailed by other countries' second thoughts about this. We get them all together and we talk through it. You know, negotiations can achieve real results. And the fact that negotiations are the last resort, and the first resort or second resort happens to be war, well, we've come a long way from the Treaty of Westphalen, right? A long way.
Thank you. My question is a little bit more personal, maybe a little bit naive. When you're coming back to US, how is it for you? Are you seen as traitors? Are you spied on with bugs in the lamp or whatever?
We're all spied on.
Want me to take
I mean,
Well, if we did nothing, we're spied on.
like in a movie. I just wanted to hear that from someone who has an idea of that.
Well, all of us are spied upon, whether it's Ray and I or the entire American.
People with sunglasses or something.
And you too.
Or you don't like to talk about it.
No, it's true that this is a question that we've repeatedly gotten from people all over Germany. And it's a fact that we live in a surveillance state now. I mean, if you've seen the movie Das Leben der Anderen, we have that now. We have a Stasi state in the United States. But the other truth is that we have a lot of people in the United States that come up to us quietly and say, thank you, please keep doing what you're doing.
And is this community growing, or is it?
Well, we have what we call the Edward Snowden effect. Courage is contagious, and we have an increasing number of people that come forward, not just in the United States. We had a young Navy sailor in Britain that began to expose the fraud, waste, and abuse that he saw in the British Trident submarine program. We have many examples of people that are starting to come forward, and for that we have not only Edward Snowden, but Thomas Drake and Bill Binney to thank. And we hope this trend continues in Germany. But it's a matter of sticking your neck out. It's a matter of taking that extra risk. And let me say one more thing. I think that everybody in this room can think of a way that they can step out of their Zone der Bequemlichkeit oder wie? Untertangeist, ist das richtig? Danke sehr. So everyone here, please think of a way that you can step out of your comfort zone and do some speaking truth to power, because it's not just Edward Snowden or Bradley Manning or Ray McGovern. It's everybody together.
I want to add a little codicil to that, and that is that as I've been speaking throughout our country and abroad, I found out that there's a common syndrome at work, and that is, and it's not only Americans, no one likes to attempt something unless they have some reasonable idea that they're going to be successful, okay? So that means that success is where duty should be, where the Wahrheit should be. In other words, we don't do this because we're sure we're going to be successful. We're trying to be faithful, okay? And the good is worth doing because it's good, okay? And now success is not unimportant, but as we see it, it's secondary, okay? The good is good, good is good. And so what I'm saying is that when you all maybe get together in small groups and you say, well, what can we do? Well, we can do about Ramstein, or we can do about this or the other thing. Just don't be deterred by the fact that you might not be successful. You know, Divisio Rosa was not successful. They were faithful, and they're a good example for all of us.
Und bitte nicht vergessen, die Gedanken sind frei. Wollen wir das singen?
Oh ja.
Die Gedanken sind frei. Okay, you start.
Die Gedanken sind
frei. Wer kann sie erraten? Sie fliegen vorbei wie nächtliche Schatten. Kein Mensch kann sie wissen, kein Jäger erschießen, es bleibe dabei. Die Gedanken sind frei.
Who has the microphone? Okay.
My name is Razad. I have roots in the Middle East and in Germany. So I like to ask you, because you're analysts, you're a former analyst. You know, this is a Geschäftsmodell of the West, of the Western states, how they act in the Middle East. So what is the outlook? If I remember, there is a map of the new Middle East from a war game in 10 years ago, where they made new borders. There is a new Kurdistan, Azerbaijan, and like this. So I mean, sometimes it's better to be prepared and to avoid the next, to act to prevent this. Mm-hmm. So what is your analysis for the next step? Is it Saudi the next, or which it has to continue? I mean,
I want to talk about the Iran-Russia-US nexus as an optimistic viewpoint, starting with the project of a new American century and how we can change that.
Yeah, I guess if I look for reasons to be optimistic, and I see a new relationship between Iran and the United States, and the first baby steps toward a new relationship with Russia. Putin expresses himself as happy with the ceasefire now in Ukraine, and I think that's largely because we finally have told Poroshenko, knock it off, stop it. No more offensive against the Easterners in Ukraine. So this may be a little too optimistic with the present evidence, but I think that there is real room for Putin, Obama, and the Iranians who see a need for some resolution, some sensible, vernünftige resolution in Syria, okay? Lest there be an ISIS Syria, for Pete's sake. So I think that I have not heard Obama or anybody else say, Bashar al-Assad has to go, Bashar al-Assad has to go. What I see is the possibility of the people getting together and trying to figure out what to do to stop this terrible, terrible catastrophe.
And I'd just like to add to that with the US-Iran nuclear deal, I think there's reason to be hopeful in the future that we can rein in Saudi Arabia, which has always competed with Iran for domination of the region, so that we can stop this atrocity in Yemen. And what we need is a little bit of more courage, a little bit more forward-leaning, proactive U.S. Willingness to say to our longtime partners, Saudi Arabia, enough is enough, because there's nothing good that's coming out of what's going on in Yemen. We're going to see increasing extremism. We're going to see the growth of ISIS. We're going to see more drone wars with Saudi Arabia continuing to attack. And so to bring it back to Germany and Ramstein, again, the base in Ramstein has a key role in this continued atrocity in Yemen, in Pakistan, in Somalia, in Syria. And unless there is the political will in this country to face the unsagbar, that you have to kind of straighten your back, Germany, and say to the United States, no, we don't want to be complicit in these wars in the Middle East. And one last thing, wenn man gegen Ramstein ist das kein Anti-Amerikanismus, das ist Antimilitarismus.
I fully agree with the last sentence you told. You read us something about the little refugee which died on the coast of Europe, and you continued, when we do not help them, the refugees, Nakba will be everywhere. But it is not true. You can't compare Nakba with ISIS. It is not the same. Nakba is the struggle of the suppressed Palestinian people, but ISIS was built up by the United States to help them to rob raw materials of Syria and to make a regime change of Assad. Thank you.
There was no question there, just a comment.
No, never mind. Okay.
I only want...
All right, it's okay. Don't worry. I can take about, given the time, maybe three more questions if everyone keeps it short. Questions and answers. Okay, so sorry to say, you already were. I'm not going to be able to call on anyone twice.
Okay, thank you very much. I would ask for regarding this Germanwings airplane crash in southern France. So I was astonished that the suicide theory, which is now the mainstream theory in Germany, and which puts a whole family of the relatives of this co-pilot into very trouble, that this it was promoted by New York Times, and there was wondering about that, and I'm doubting this history. And my question is, do you have any specific information which points maybe into a completely other direction of who is responsible for this crash? Because everything, as far as I considered everything about this crash, I cannot believe this official story.
Jetzt sind wir überfragt.
Okay, on my pencil, is there a woman here who has raised her hand? Okay.
Another airplane, the missing Malaysian airplane over the East China Sea, whose remains supposedly have reappeared at La Réunion. What do you know about this? It was a short mention on CNN, nobody else had it. It's silent again. What's that?
If you guys don't know anything,
you know, we have been traveling mostly by train for many hours, so unfortunately, neither of us are familiar with the report, and we're not able to comment on it. Or did you have something?
This is about the Malaysian airplane that disappeared over in the ocean. Again, sind wir überfragt. Wir wissen es nicht. Wir könnten etwas erfunden, aber das hilft nicht.
One last question. One last question.
I don't know who did. I can't say. I'll give the two because the answers are short. If your question is really short, and yours also, that will be the end, I think. Sorry.
It's a super short and super trivial question, actually. This whole regime change thing, it's not just a bunch of people sitting in a room. It's like an industry, right? So there's serious manpower behind that. I was just wondering, what kind of dimensions are we talking here? Is it like hundreds or thousands or 10,000s of people who are directly involved in this whole regime change enterprise? I mean, it's analysis and strategy and operations and so on.
Are you talking about Ukraine?
No, I'm talking about the whole planet. I mean, we are talking about dozens of regime changes which are in various stages at this very moment.
Well, there are, you know, very different kinds of regime change. What I found the most blatant, what the head of Stratfor, one of the more respected think tanks, said was the most obvious, was the most blatant coup in the history of mankind. That was the Ukraine coup. And most people in the West like to start on the 23rd of February last year. And who can tell me what's wrong with starting on the 23rd of February to describe what happened?
One more.
Yeah, well, what happened the day before?
Right,
so it was a coup d'etat, right? Now, the coup d'etat was preceded by how many $1 billion to help the Ukrainians' aspirations to join the West? How many?
5.
5 billion? No, billion. With a B? Yes, with a B. And who bragged about that? The Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland. So you could do a lot of agitation with $5 billion. It even can hire proto-fascists who will do your dirty work for you as a spearhead. So each little coup is different. The one in 53 in Tehran, the one in 54 in Guatemala, the one in 73 in Chile. They're all different, but they're all born of this notion that we have to prevent either leftists or communists, or in this case, we want to draw the Ukraine into NATO. Now, the last thing I'd like to say is that Genscher and the others all promised the Russians that they wouldn't move NATO 1 inch toward the east. Now, you know what happened, right? But they were warned, okay? Now, we know that from WikiLeaks. How do we know that? Well, if I've seen one Moscow cable, if I've seen one cable from the embassy in Moscow, I've seen about 3,000, and actually I've written some, okay, from Moscow. Now, one of the cables that Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, released was a cable from our embassy in Moscow dated the 1st of February 2008, okay, during the Bush regime. So our ambassador there, Bill Burns, was called into the foreign ministry by Sergei Lavrov, who's still the foreign minister, and we know that Sergei Lavrov gave him the Riot Act. And what did Lavrov say? Well, it was on the title of this cable. It said, "Niet means niet." Russia's red line having to do with Ukraine and NATO. 1st of February 2008. The 2nd of March, no, 2nd of April 2008, there was a summit in Bucharest. NATO gathered there, and their decision was, and I quote, "Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO," end quote. Well, niet means niet. No, they were still in the mindset of Wolfowitz, who says, the Russians won't stop us. Well, people talk about Ukraine being Russia's backyard. That's wrong. It's Russia's front yard, folks. It's their front yard, okay? And if the people in Washington and London thought that they could do this with Putin just sitting back and not doing anything, they were really, really poorly advised. So net means net, and just finish by saying this was one regime change too many, okay?
Okay, excuse me. You're out of order now. No.
Well, I don't.
I just want to comment a little bit about your question also, because I know it was a very general question. And it's just to say that the war machine has never been a force for liberty or democracy. The war machine does not make us safe. It has never made us safe. Germany will not be safe being attached to this war machine. And yes, it incorporates hundreds of thousands of people that are involved in the surveillance industry, that are involved in media control, not only in the United States, but in Germany and elsewhere. And I would also go on to say that the war machine is based on people who are just making huge profits off of the drone wars and others. And this has evolved into something like a Frankenstein monster. And I don't think Germany wants this Frankenstein. Don't feed the Frankenstein monster. It needs to be starved of any capability to keep on going, because it will not keep Germany safe. There will be a Rückschlag, a backlash, when terrorists realize that what Ramstein is really doing. So again, this is a very, very dangerous force, probably the most dangerous force in the world right now, this war machine.
I'm going to say 1 or 2 minutes, and also, then I'll give it back to you if you want to make a final statement.
I think Valerie Plame was one of your over here.
Yeah.
Valerie Plame was one of your colleagues. I wonder if you can tell any stories other than what I've seen in the movie about her or her husband or the scandal in general. Thank you.
Well, I happened to be in Santa Fe, New Mexico 2 weeks ago when I had dinner with Valerie and her husband Joe Wilson. Valerie's career was ruined by the likes of Paul Wolfowitz and the others that wanted to retaliate against Joe Wilson. Let me see if people know about Joe Wilson, what he did and how courageous he was. Raise your hand if you know about it. Okay, well, only a few, so let me just say very briefly that Valerie Plame was an analyst in, well, actually she was also in the operations department working on weapons of mass destruction to prevent them from going to bad actors. Joe Wilson had been an ambassador to African countries. Now, he knew people in Niger and elsewhere, and when this phony report, this forged document came into Cheney's cognizance saying, aha, the Iraqis are seeking yellow cake uranium in deepest, darkest Africa in Niger, okay? We need to, this is an additional device of, well, the reality was that they had plenty of yellow cake in countries. It was not a matter of getting more yellow cake. And how are they going to, I ask you, how are they going to get yellow cake from deepest? Well, they sent Joe Wilson because he knew the people in Niger, and he came back and he said, this is cockamamie, this is crazy. There's no substance to this rumor. Now, Cheney didn't like that, right? And so what he did in retaliation was to uncover Joe Wilson's wife, who was head of many spies who were working for us on nonproliferation. Now, why did they do that? Because Joe Wilson, to his great credit, wrote an article for the New York Times, an op-ed. The head of it was, the headline, What I Didn't Find in Africa. Okay? And that got Cheney very, very angry. So what's the result? His wife lost her job. They live in Santa Fe now. They have twins. They're reasonably happy, but she has no retirement. And Joe Wilson is sort of out of the Foreign Service now. He was already there. But they're great heroes in my view because they stood up to this cockamamie story about yellow cake uranium coming from deepest, darkest Africa. And what can you expect from that? That kind of brutal retaliation where Valerie Plame, the person you asked about, was exposed was uncovered and could no longer work at her trade. And she had been doing great work. So she, by the way, signed the most recent VIPS memorandum. It may be on the table there. It was a memorandum where 27 of us now came out criticizing our former directors who are still, can you believe it, who are still defending torture, still pretending that we got good information from torture. And as I think you remember us saying, you can't get reliable information from torture, but if you want unreliable information, if you want information from somebody who's tortured, who says, Wolfowitz is right. Those people analyzing in Langley, they don't know what they're talking about. You get one captive, torture him, as this fellow Alibi was. He's, oh yeah, sure, well I used to send up Al-Qaeda operatives up to Baghdad all the time. You get trained in chemical and weapons, and that's what happened, folks. So, you know, in a very backhanded way, torture can work if it's unreliable information you want. And what we're trying to do is say, look, American people, these are a bunch of thugs. These are a bunch of liars and thugs. You saw two of them in uniform on that thing. Uniform used to mean something. I was an Army officer, and I'm ashamed that we were told in our day, an officer doesn't lie. Well, now they're like at the highest level. They need to be canned, and the sorrowful thing is that Obama doesn't feel like he can do that. So we're trying to expose all this and try to get Americans and Germans and anybody else who will listen to us so that you know, the next regime change won't be attempted, and that maybe Ramstein regime change in America. Well, it's true. But you know, Ramstein really needs to be dealt with, and you know, we hadn't been quite aware of the implications, although we knew that ohne Ramstein geht's nicht mit den Drohnen-Krieg. But that's big, folks. That's really big. That's something you can do. Would you be successful? Wrong question, right? Will you be faithful? Give it a try, you guys. Give it a try.
I just have to say about three things, incidentally. Sometimes people ask me, too loud? Yeah. Why I still believe, I'm almost as old as Ray, actually, why I work still in the peace movement and all of that. Well, you know what? We had a victory, actually, a huge one, during the Vietnam War, through soldier resistance, GI resistance, and at that time, the whole German student movement was helping thousands of GIs stationed here in Berlin and everywhere to desert. We should remember about Ramstein and also to resist. And historians have said that it was, of course, the Vietnamese people, but also the resistance in the U.S. Army that made, that actually made such a loss to the U.S. they didn't even manage to put one military base in Vietnam. So they, of course, sent their capitalist firms in after, but this is another story. We should remember about Ramstein that it was brave resistors, not only Edward Snowden, but Brandon Bryant, who basically was an average drone pilot. You know, this ad you talked about is to encourage drone pilots. There are drone pilots and people working in Ramstein. There's Americans there. We used to, during the 60s, hand out anti-war newspapers. The German student movement used to distribute anti-war newspapers to GIs that the GIs helped write. You know, we did have, not only through us, but a success, an actual historical success. And I think that we are all talking about Ramstein, but what is becoming an issue in the whole peace movement and human rights? What really are we going to do about it? I mean, what is it going to take after these disclosures, Snowden disclosures about with the documents? Brandon Bryant came here in April 2013, told the story to the Süddeutsche and to ARD, was on Panorama and all that. It was taken up by the whole German press. Did you know that in the US, if you looked up Ramstein and drone, if you looked in Google, you could look under Google Ramstein Drohnen and get 7 pages of die Welt, alles. You want to look at Ramstein drone, not one English language news outlet, not even The Guardian, reported on Brandon Bryant's testimony here in Germany. Only RT and Press TV and the World Socialist Web. So that's how any English-speaking person could find out about it. So don't be discouraged if you don't have everyone in America saying, hey, Ramstein, we have to do this here. We have to get the word out, and we have to make sure that we know that the German government has Hoheit, has sovereignty. And that's about enough. But there are no secret agreements, whatever. It's amazing that for 25 years after German reunification, so many peace activists, even the Fraktion Die Linke, said Ramstein is extra, these bases are extra, it's under German control, it's German responsibility. Okay, and that's enough, I think. I wanted to see, I just have to say that, I'm sorry. But, did you want to say something? Did you want to say something? Well, I want to thank you, Tim. No, something else. But you might want to say one sentence.
Thank you for all of you for being here and for this very, very inspiring talk this evening. Just to carry on, Brandon Bryant is supposed to testify in front of the NSA inquiry on the 1st of October.
Here?
Yes.
Wunderbar.
That comes with a double thing. The Linke and the SPD are almost at cutting each other's throats because the SPD and the CDU want to go immediately to have him heard. I hope that he has good counsel and that someone here like Kalle can represent him and not have him go alone so that they make him look like some feeble-minded witness to brush this off the table. We need to support him if he should come here. We need to go to the inquiry. You can just register and don't let them wash this under the table. I think this is the strategy. It's coming up. Pay attention, NSA inquiry. There are a lot of people writing about this, podcasting this, blogging about this. That's all. On the 1st of October, and the next session is next Thursday, coming up. Thank you.
Actually, that's the NSA Untersuchungsausschuss is the only place in the Bundestag that der NSA-Untersuchungsausschuss ist die einzige Stelle im Bundestag, wo auch Ramstein überhaupt besprochen wird. Also ist es irgendwie nicht vor Bundestag, irgendwo. Es ist nicht wie im Haushaltskommission, nichts nicht. So, es ist sehr wichtig, was es ist sehr, ja, öffentlich. Und da müssen wir auch, finde ich, die ganze Friedensbewegung, die ganze antikapitalistische Bewegungen und die Whistleblower-Bewegungen und die Anti-Überwachungsbewegungen viel mehr zusammenführen, gerade um Ramstein. Und Amnesty International, alle die können mitmachen. So, okay, ich wollte nur erstmal ganz kurz unsere Donator, Kim Slater, bedanken. Der ist auch hat in den GI-Widerstand und alles Bewegungen mitgearbeitet seit fast 2 Jahrzehnten. Jetzt wollte ich nur fragen, ob ihr beide jeweils, sagen wir 3 Sätze oder so, noch sagen wollt.
Okay. Oh, you go ahead.
Also, I'm being elected to say the last word. I have a lot of respect for prophets. And one of the prophets that I respect most is a fellow named Cesar Chavez. Some of you know about him. He was a farm worker in our western states. And with very little to go on, he started an incredible boycott of grapes that these poor people had to pick for almost pennies a day. Well, he used to always say, you know, it's really nice that you people are concerned about our plight. or, you know, when we pick all the fruit and everything and then go back to Mexico. We really like the op-eds that you write, and the speech is just wonderful. But I have to tell you that without action, nothing's going to happen, okay? Without action, nothing's going to happen. Now, people say to me, but Cesar, there aren't enough of us. There aren't enough of us. And I say to them, there are enough of us, but without Aktion, without action, nothing's going to happen. And so I hope that we don't have a debate club here or a bunch of op-ed writers. I hope we have a bunch of activists, because as my friend, the poet, says, what's her name, Alice Walker, well, one of her colleagues always said, activism, and we're called activists now. I didn't like the word when I was employed by the CIA, but activists is what we are. We're proud of it, because activism is the price we pay. It's the rent we pay for living on this planet. And we all have a little rent to pay. Let's pay it. Let's stick our necks out. Last thing I'll say is, you know, I've been accused of having something against necks, okay? And I don't. I think necks are really nice. They're convenient connections between head and torso. But if there is nothing for which you'll risk that neck, then it has become your idol, and necks are not worthy of idol worship. So stick your necks out, folks. Let's get this Bewegung going. Let's close down Ramstein and that terrible thing.
What do you say to the people, even to me, who say, there's some people going to demonstrate in Ramstein, but I don't like those people. I'm a little worried about those people, or I'm a little worried about these people, and I just want to work with my group, and I don't really know who are the whistles, I don't know this and that. How can we do with it? This is a problem right now. We actually have wir haben vereint in der fast, ich habe noch nie sowas gesehen wie diese Ramstein-Stimmung, aber wir sind aktionsunfähig, weil wir uns alle nicht so mögen. So.
Also ich werde ein bisschen dazu sprechen, und wenn Sie etwas später hinzufügen möchten, also bitte sehr. Aber vielleicht ist es besser auf Englisch, weil mein Wortschatz nicht so gut ist auf Deutsch. I would say that the best way to move forward with these different peace groups in Germany is maybe to look at what's happening in the United States with the battle against Shell and Chevron in the Arctic. In the United States right now, we have a union of peace movements. We have the Indians, the Native American Indians, who are fighting for to keep control of their land, which is coveted by the oil companies for the fracking gas, for the oil. They have made common cause with environmental groups, which in turn have made common cause with the anti-nuclear groups. And I would say what is needed to be done is to reach out to the other groups, find common cause with them, maybe take some interest in what they're interested in and find something in common and move forward. In the United States, we have the Black Lives Matter groups, which began with the deaths of many black people, including, what was the name of it? Michael Braun in Ferguson, Missouri. And they have made common cause with Palestinian groups when they discovered that the police in Ferguson were receiving training from Israel. So the Palestinians have made common cause with Ferguson groups, and the Palestinian cause have made common cause with union workers, which stopped unloading Israeli ships last July, during the Israeli attack on Gaza. And so find other groups, and it's difficult. It takes time, it takes effort. But if you're not interested in what they're interested in, how can you expect them to join your peace movement?
Can we give a woman the last word? Darf ich das letzte Wort an eine Frau?
Couldn't do any better than that.
Okay, gut. Also jetzt ist das Ende. Und wir können aber hier bleiben, miteinander reden, aber Ray und Elisabeth müssen jetzt ein Fernsehinterview mit Weltnetz TV machen. Okay.
Vielen Dank und vielen Dank an Elsa. Applaus für Elsa.
Das Gedicht